In the quiet hours of the night, when the noise of the world fades and only distant city echoes remain, Chicago tells its truest stories. Not the loud ones filled with gunfire and flashing headlines, but the subtle, carefully hidden tales of men who ruled without being seen. Among those men was Anthony Zizzo, a figure whose influence stretched across decades while his name rarely crossed the lips of ordinary citizens. Chicago, in the early 1950s, was a city rebuilding its image. The scars of Prohibition were still visible, yet the streets appeared calmer on the surface. Beneath that calm, however, power was shifting quietly. Organized crime had learned a crucial lesson. Survival no longer depended on violence alone. It depended on discipline, silence, and control. Anthony Zizzo understood this lesson instinctively. Born into a working-class Italian-American environment, Zizzo grew up surrounded by tradition, loyalty, and unspoken rules. Respect was earned through consistency, not noise. As a young man, he observed older figures who spoke little but commanded rooms without raising their voices. He noticed how influence often moved through back rooms, union halls, late-night meetings over coffee rather than whiskey. By the time Zizzo began moving within Chicago's criminal circles, the city's underworld had matured. The era of reckless showmanship was fading. Those who survived were the ones who blended into everyday life, men who wore ordinary suits, paid their bills on time, and attended family gatherings like everyone else. Zizzo fit this mold perfectly. He was never flashy. He didn't seek attention. And that was precisely why he was trusted. As industries expanded after World War II, opportunities quietly multiplied. Construction, waste hauling, labor unions, and small manufacturing firms became pathways to steady, invisible income. Zizzo learned to navigate these spaces with patience. He understood paperwork, contracts, and relationships. Where others saw routine business dealings, he saw leverage. Unlike street-level operators, Zizzo rarely placed himself at the center of action. Instead, he positioned himself as a connector, a man who ensured that the right people spoke to each other at the right time. His calm demeanor made him approachable, yet his reputation ensured he was never underestimated. During the 1960s, Chicago was changing rapidly. Neighborhoods evolved, demographics shifted, and political structures adapted to new pressures. Throughout these changes, Zizzo remained consistent. He did not chase trends or power for its own sake. His strength lay in stability. People came to him because they knew he listened. Decisions were made slowly, carefully, and without unnecessary risk. Sleep-time stories often focus on chaos, but Zizzo's world moved at a steady pace. Meetings took place in quiet offices or modest restaurants where nothing seemed out of place. Conversations were measured, promises were kept. In a world built on trust among criminals, reliability became the rarest currency, and Zizzo possessed it in abundance. As years passed, law enforcement tactics evolved, surveillance improved. Informants became more common. Many figures fell because they talked too much or trusted the wrong person. Zizzo adapted by speaking even less. He avoided unnecessary contact and delegated responsibilities carefully. His name stayed off paperwork. His presence remained minimal. The true power of Anthony Zizzo was not fear, it was predictability. People knew where they stood with him. He never needed to remind others of his position. Silence did that for him. By the late 1970s and into the 1980s, Chicago's underworld faced unprecedented pressure. Federal investigations targeted organized crime structures nationwide. While some figures reacted with panic or aggression, Zizzo remained composed. He had built his influence slowly, layer by layer, ensuring that no single failure could collapse his position. At home, he lived like any other citizen. Neighbors saw a quiet man who kept to himself. There were no public displays of wealth, no dramatic confrontation. This ordinary appearance was not accidental, it was strategic. Zizzo understood that the most powerful figures are often the least visible. As night settles over Chicago, it becomes easier to imagine how a man like Anthony Zizzo operated. The city lights dim, traffic slows, and the true heartbeat of the city becomes subtle and steady. His story is not one of explosions and headlines, but of patience, discipline, and unseen control. This is the beginning of a long, quiet journey through decades of calculated decisions and silence. Authority, one that unfolded while the city slept, unaware of who truly held the strings. The deeper Anthony Zizzo moved into Chicago, as Underworld, the more he understood that true power rarely announced itself. It drifted quietly, like smoke in a closed room, shaping outcomes long before anyone noticed its presence, while others sought recognition. Zizzo focused on endurance. He believed that the man who lasted the longest would ultimately control the most. By the time Chicago entered a new decade of economic expansion, Zizzo had already positioned himself where decisions mattered. He spent hours listening, observing how businesses truly operated once the public doors closed. He noticed how contracts were negotiated, how labor disputes were resolved, and how influence flowed not through threats, but through obligation. Every favor created a debt, and every debt strengthened his invisible network. Unlike street operators who relied on force, Zizzo relied on structure. He preferred predictable systems over chaos. Waste hauling routes, construction schedules, supply chains. These were not random processes. They were repeatable, measurable, and therefore controllable. Zizzo learned to see patterns where others saw paperwork. He recognized that whoever influenced these systems could quietly shape entire neighborhoods without ever stepping onto a street corner. Chicago's unions played a crucial role in this world. They represented labor, but they also represented leverage. Zizzo never rushed into these environments. He approached them with patience, earning trust slowly. He never positioned himself as a leader, only as a reliable problem solver. When disputes arose, he was the man who knew how to calm tensions without escalating them. Over time, his presence became expected, almost necessary. What set Zizzo apart was his ability to remain emotionally distant. He did not form impulsive alliances or personal rivalries. Every relationship was measured by longevity. He believed that emotion clouded judgment, and judgment was everything. While others reacted to setbacks with anger, Zizzo absorbed them silently, adjusting his approach without drawing attention. The city itself seemed to cooperate with his methods. Chicago was a place where hard work and discretion were respected. People minded their business. If someone paid their dues, kept promises, and caused no unnecessary trouble, they were left alone. Zizzo fit seamlessly into this environment. His name rarely surfaced, but when it did, it carried weight. As law enforcement began shifting its focus toward organized crime networks, many figures grew reckless. Some became paranoid, others arrogant. Zizzo did neither. He reduced his visibility even further. Meetings became fewer. Messages were indirect. Decisions were filtered through layers of trusted intermediaries. This distance protected him and reinforced his reputation as a man who never acted without purpose. He understood timing better than most. There were moments when doing nothing was the most powerful move available. Zizzo waded through storms, allowing others to make mistakes while he preserved stability. He believed survival was not about speed, but about balance. At night, Chicago transformed into something quieter, slower. These were the hours when Zizzo reflected. He reviewed conversations, weighed outcomes, and adjusted strategies. His mind worked like a ledger, balancing risk and reward with remarkable precision. Sleep came easily to him because his world was controlled, organized, and predictable. While others chased wealth, Zizzo chased insulation. He avoided excess. His lifestyle remained modest by design. There were no displays of luxury, no sudden changes that might attract curiosity. He believed comfort was more valuable than attention. Comfort meant safety. Over the years, his influence expanded not because he demanded it, but because people sought it. Contractors wanted stability. Union figures wanted peace. Business owners wanted consistency. Zizzo provided all three. He became a quiet anchor in a constantly shifting underworld. Trust, however, was never given freely. Zizzo tested people through time. He observed how they behaved under pressure, how they spoke when they thought no one was listening. Those who proved unreliable were simply removed from his circle, not violently, but completely. Access was his strongest weapon. Once withdrawn, it rarely returned. As the decades moved forward, the world outside changed rapidly. Technology advanced, surveillance improved. Yet Zizzo's approach remained effective because it was based on human behavior, not trends. People still wanted security, they still valued predictability, and they still responded to calm authority. In conversations, Zizzo spoke softly. He never repeated himself. His words carried weight because they were rare. Silence in his world was louder than threats. It signaled confidence. By this point, Anthony Zizzo was no longer just a participant in Chicago's underworld, he was a stabilizing force within it. He did chase control. Control came to him naturally, drawn by consistency and restraint. His power was not enforced, it was accepted, as the city slept, unaware of the systems quietly guiding its undercurrents. Zizzo remained exactly where he wanted, to be unseen, uninterrupted, and secure. As time moved forward, Anthony Zizzo's world became quieter, not because there was less happening, but because he had learned how to filter noise from necessity. In Chicago's underworld, information was dangerous when handled poorly. Zizzo treated it like fragile glass, never rushed, never exposed, always protected. He understood that knowing too much could be as risky as knowing too little. So he learned exactly how much awareness was required to stay ahead without becoming vulnerable. What defined Zizzo during this period was restraint. While others expanded aggressively, he refined what he already controlled. He preferred depth over breadth. Instead of spreading himself thin across dozens of ventures, he focused on strengthening a few critical areas that provided long-term stability. This approach allowed him to remain relevant without ever appearing ambitious. Chicago's rhythm suited him. The city breathed steadily, shaped by routine and repetition. Trucks followed the same routes. Construction projects unfolded in predictable phases. Labor disputes rose and settled in cycles. Zizzo synchronized himself with this rhythm, making his presence feel natural rather than imposed. People rarely questioned what felt normal, and Zizzo worked hard to make his influence feel exactly that. One of his greatest strengths was his understanding of human patience. He knew when to wait and when to move. He watched others rush into opportunities without considering consequences, only to later retreat under pressure. Zizzo rarely retreated. His decisions were slow, deliberate, and final. Once he committed, he followed through quietly and completely. Trust remained his most valuable currency. But trust in his world was not emotional, it was practical. People trusted Zizzo because he delivered consistency. He did not promise what he could guarantee. He did not exaggerate outcomes. If he said something would happen, it happened. If he said nothing, that silence itself carried meaning. Meetings became increasingly minimal. Many arrangements were handled indirectly, through people who understood his expectations without needing explanation. This distance protected him. It also reinforced his authority. The fewer words he used, the more carefully people listened when he did speak, while others allowed ego to shape their behavior. Zizzo viewed ego as a liability. He avoided confrontation unless it served a purpose. Even then, his approach was calm and measured. He believed conflict should resolve problems, not create new ones. Violence was unpredictable, and unpredictability was the enemy of control. As the city evolved, so did the methods used to monitor it. Surveillance became more advanced. Investigations became more coordinated. Many figures failed to adapt. They relied on outdated habits, assuming the old ways would protect them forever. Zizzo did not share that illusion. He adjusted his routines, reduced exposure, and relied even more heavily on insulation. At home, his life remained intentionally ordinary. He valued privacy, routine, and familiarity. These elements grounded him. They reminded him that stability was not something to chase, it was something to maintain. By keeping his personal life simple, he minimized risk and distraction. The nights were when Zizzo did his clearest thinking. Chicago after dark was quieter, less demanding. He reviewed conversations in his mind, measuring tone and intent. He replayed moments not to dwell on them, but to extract lessons. Every interaction, no matter how small, carried information. Unlike many in his world, Zizzo never confused survival with success. To him, success meant longevity. It meant remaining useful, trusted, and untouched by chaos. He measured progress not in money or influence, but in uninterrupted time. Those who underestimated him often did so because they mistook silence for weakness. They assumed that power needed to be visible to be real. Zizzo allowed this misunderstanding to exist. It protected him. People revealed more when they believed they were unobserved. Over time, his name became associated with calm resolution. When situations grew tense, people sought his involvement not because he demanded it, but because his presence reduced uncertainty. He was not a commander, he was a stabilizer. Chicago continued to change. New faces appeared. Old structures weakened. Yet Zizzo remained adaptable, because his methods were timeless. He relied on behavior, not trends. People still wanted security. They still avoided risk. They still responded to quiet authority. At this stage of his life, Anthony Zizzo was no longer building power, he was maintaining equilibrium. His influence existed in balance, not expansion. He had learned that the most dangerous moment for any figure was when growth outpaced control. As the city slept, unaware of the invisible systems shaping its quiet decisions, Anthony Zizzo remained exactly where he belonged, operating without urgency, guiding without force, and enduring without exposure. As the years continued to pass, the environment around Anthony Zizzo grew more complex, not louder. The noise belonged to others, those who reacted emotionally to pressure, who mistook movement for progress, and who believed survival required constant expansion. Zizzo believed the opposite. He understood that longevity depended on understanding when to stop, when to pause, and when to let others exhaust themselves. Chicago. Underworld had entered an era where intelligence mattered more than intimidation. The city had learned to disguise its shadows well. Businesses appeared legitimate. Operations were layered with paperwork, and authority moved through conversations rather than commands. Zizzo thrived in this setting because he had always preferred systems over spectacle. He paid close attention to how people behaved when they believed they were secure. Comfort revealed character. Some became careless. Others grew greedy. Zizzo remained disciplined. He believed consistency was the ultimate disguise. When a person never changed their behavior, there was nothing to notice. While others worried about exposure, Zizzo focused on insulation. He ensured that distance separated him from instability. Decisions passed through trusted channels. Responsibilities were distributed carefully, never concentrated in one place. If pressure arrived, it dissipated before reaching him. One of his defining traits during this period was emotional neutrality. Praise did not excite him. Criticism did not provoke him. He treated both as temporary conditions. His reactions were always measured, always quiet. In a world where emotion often dictated fate, this control set him apart. Chicago itself seemed to mirror his mindset. The city did not rush. It endured. Winters came and went. Streets changed names. Buildings were replaced. Yet the rhythm remained steady. Zizzo aligned himself with that rhythm, allowing time to work in his favor. Relationships evolved naturally around him. People sought reassurance more than direction. They wanted stability in uncertain conditions. Zizzo provided that without promises or threats. His reputation rested on reliability, not fear. When something needed to be handled quietly, his name surfaced not publicly, but privately, where it mattered. He avoided unnecessary visibility. Public attention was unpredictable. Silence was manageable. Zizzo chose manageability every time. He believed the safest place to stand was slightly behind the obvious center, close enough to influence outcomes, far enough to avoid scrutiny. As external pressure increased, many figures panicked. They tightened control too aggressively or loosened it entirely. Zizzo did neither. He adjusted subtly. Meetings shortened. Communication simplified. He reduced complexity wherever possible. Complexity created mistakes. Mistakes created exposure. At night, when Chicago settled into stillness, Zizzo reflected without urgency. He reviewed patterns, not people. Patterns were honest. They revealed where pressure would rise and where it would fade. He trusted patterns more than instincts. Unlike many around him, he never believed power was permanent. He treated it as temporary, something to manage carefully rather than exploit recklessly. This perspective kept him grounded. It prevented overreach. His personal routines remained unchanged. Routine was his anchor. Wake, work, observe, rest. There was comfort in repetition. It created predictability, and predictability reduced risk. He believed that if every day looked similar, nothing stood out. Those who interacted with him often described a sense of calm afterward. Conversations felt resolved, even when no clear answers were given. Zizzo understood that certainty was not always necessary. Clarity was. He clarified expectations without drama. The underworld around him shifted constantly, but Zizzo remained steady. New personalities entered, eager to prove themselves. Old ones faded quietly. Zizzo neither rushed to accept newcomers nor mourned those who disappeared. He understood that change was inevitable. Stability came from adaptation, not resistance. He listened more than he spoke. Silence allowed others to reveal priorities. When someone talked too much, it often meant they were unsure. Zizzo let them talk. Information gathered naturally, without effort. As time continued its slow march forward, Anthony Zizzo stood as a figure defined, not by moments, but by endurance. He did not chase legacy. He avoided history. His goal was simple: remain untouched by chaos. And so, while the city slept, unaware of the quiet structures holding parts of it together, Zizzo remained where he had always been, present without being seen, influential without being exposed, calm while others struggled to keep up. As time continued to move forward, Anthony Zizzo became increasingly aware that the most dangerous moments were not filled with chaos, but with comfort. Comfort made people careless. It softened instincts and dulled awareness. Zizzo refused to let comfort change him. Even when circumstances were stable, his attention remained sharp, his routines unchanged. Chicago's underworld had entered a phase where survival depended on discretion more than dominance. Loud figures faded quickly. Those who lasted learned to exist between the lines, operating in spaces where visibility was minimal and influence subtle. Zizzo had mastered this balance long ago. Now he simply refined it. He observed how pressure traveled through networks. It never arrived all at once. It moved slowly, shifting from one point to another, testing weaknesses. Zizzo ensured that no single weakness could reach him directly. He believed that distance was protection, and protection was freedom. The people around him noticed something unusual. Zizzo never rushed decisions. Even when situations demanded urgency, he responded calmly. This calm unsettled some and reassured others. To Zizzo, urgency was often manufactured. Real threats announced themselves quietly, long before action was required. Chicago's economic landscape continued to evolve. New projects appeared. Old structures dissolved. Zizzo watched these changes without attachment. He understood that attachment led to stubbornness, and stubbornness led to mistakes. Flexibility, not force, kept him relevant. He placed great importance on observation. A single conversation could reveal more than months of surveillance. Tone, hesitation, confidence, these details mattered. Zizzo listened for what was not said. Silence between words often carried the most meaning. As others grew impatient, Zizzo remained steady. He believed impatience was the fastest path to exposure. Time favored those who waited. He allowed situations to unfold naturally, intervening only when necessary, and even then, his involvement was subtle. The city itself seemed to slow around him. Nights were quiet, streets emptied. In these moments, Chicago felt honest. Zizzo valued these hours. They offered clarity. Without distraction, patterns became visible. He trusted patterns more than promises. His relationships were carefully maintained. He avoided emotional dependence. Loyalty to him was a professional agreement, not a personal bond. This perspective kept expectations clear and disappointment rare. He never asked for more than someone could reasonably give. Zizzo, as great as strength, remained his invisibility. People rarely spoke his name aloud. When they did, it was with caution. He was known not for intimidation, but for reliability. Reliability created respect, and respect created compliance without force. While others measured success in expansion, Zizzo measured it in stability. Each year that passed without disruption was a victory. Each quiet resolution strengthened his position. He believed the best outcome was one that left no trace. He adapted his habits as the world around him changed. He simplified wherever possible. Complexity created exposure. Simple systems were easier to protect. He reduced unnecessary interactions and eliminated redundant risks. Despite his influence, Zizzo never considered himself untouchable. This belief kept him disciplined. Overconfidence destroyed many before him. He treated every day as a reminder that survival required vigilance. The city continued to transform. Technology advanced. Oversight increased. Yet human behavior remained consistent. Fear, ambition, insecurity, these emotions never changed. Zizzo built his approach around these constants. Those who encountered him often left feeling unsettled, not because he threatened them, but because he revealed how little noise was needed to control outcomes. His presence forced people to slow down, to think, to reconsider. At this stage of his life, Anthony Zizzo existed less as a participant and more as a quiet force of gravity. Situations bent subtly around him. Outcomes shifted without obvious cause. As Chicago slept, wrapped in the illusion of calm streets and ordinary routine, Zizzo remained awake in spirit, measured, alert, and unchanged. His world did not require excitement. It required balance, and balance was something he had mastered completely. As the years unfolded, the environment surrounding Anthony Zizzo became more layered, more refined, and far more cautious. The world he moved through no longer rewarded bold gestures or visible control. Instead, it favored those who understood restraint. Zizzo had always understood that restraint was not weakness, it was strategy. He noticed that the most dangerous people were not the loud ones, but the anxious ones. Anxiety led to mistakes, and mistakes created exposure. Zizzo made it a habit to remove himself from emotionally charged situations. He preferred clarity over urgency, patience over pressure. This mindset allowed him to see opportunities others missed and avoid traps others rushed into. Chicago, as structure, continued to evolve, but its core remained unchanged. The city still depended on systems: transportation, labor, construction, maintenance. These systems required coordination, predictability, and quiet agreements. Zizzo positioned himself where predictability mattered most. He didn't control everything, nor did he want to. He controlled enough. He believed that power should never feel heavy. The moment it became burdensome, it attracted attention. Zizzo kept his influence light, almost invisible. Decisions flowed through channels that seemed natural, unforced. People acted not because they were ordered to, but because it made sense to do so. He observed that many failed because they overestimated loyalty. Loyalty was fragile when built on fear or profit alone. Zizzo built his relationships on mutual benefit and reliability. When expectations were clear and outcomes consistent, loyalty followed naturally. Time had taught him another lesson: silence aged well. Words spoken too early could not be taken back. Silence allowed room for adjustment. Zizzo often delayed responses, not to manipulate, but to understand. He listened to how situations evolved without his input. Only when necessary did he intervene. The nights remained his sanctuary. Chicago after dark revealed truths hidden during the day. With fewer distractions, his thoughts aligned. He reflected on patterns: how pressure moved, how people reacted, how stability was either preserved or lost. These reflections were not emotional. They were analytical. Zizzo maintained a strict separation between his personal life and his responsibilities. This separation protected him. Emotional entanglement blurred judgment. He avoided unnecessary familiarity. Even those close to him understood boundaries existed for a reason. As oversight increased across the city, many became nervous. They changed routines too frequently, drawing attention to themselves. Zizzo did the opposite. He maintained consistency. Predictable behavior blended into the background. Invisibility was achieved not by hiding, but by appearing ordinary. He understood that every environment had a breaking point. His role was to ensure pressure never reached that point. He diffused tension early, quietly, before it could escalate. Prevention was easier than correction. What set Zizzo apart was his ability to remain unchanged while everything else shifted. He adapted without announcing adaptation. His methods evolved subtly, never dramatically. Those around him often did, to realize change had occurred until they looked back. He avoided excess in all forms. Excess wealth, excess speech, excess movement each carried risk. Moderation was his shield. He believed that if nothing stood out, nothing would be questioned. As years passed, Anthony Zizzo became less a man and more a presence. People felt his influence without seeing its source. Outcomes aligned, conflicts dissolved, stability returned. Chicago continued its quiet cycle of change and repetition. Seasons passed, streets aged, new faces arrived. Through it all, Zizzo remained calm, measured, and deliberate. As the city slept, unaware of the careful balance being maintained beneath its surface, Zizzo existed in his preferred state, steady, unseen, and in control not through force, but through understanding. Time has a way of smoothing sharp edges, and in the world Anthony Zizzo occupied, that smoothing was intentional. He believed that anything jagged attracted attention, and attention was the one thing he never invited. As Chicago continued its steady march through change, Zizzo refined the art of remaining unnoticed while still shaping outcomes in quiet, decisive ways. He paid close attention to the difference between motion and progress. Many people mistook constant activity for effectiveness, filling their day with meetings, calls, and appearances that created the illusion of control. Zizzo did less and achieved more. His calendar remained sparse. Each interaction served a purpose, and every purpose was weighed before it was pursued. What others called patience, Zizzo considered discipline. He trained himself to wait without expectation. Waiting revealed truth. It showed who became restless, who made mistakes, and who revealed intentions prematurely. Zizzo observed these moments without judgment, storing the information for later use. He rarely needed to act immediately because others acted first. Chicago, as undercurrents shifted subtly during this period. Pressure did not arrive in waves anymore. It seeped in slowly, testing the foundations of established routines. Zizzo anticipated this shift. He simplified his connections further, ensuring that complexity never outpaced understanding. Every layer he added had a purpose. Every layer he removed reduced risk. He believed strongly in alignment. When people's interests aligned naturally, outcomes required little force. When alignment was artificial, it collapsed under stress. Zizzo never forced alignment. He allowed people to recognize mutual benefit on their own. This approach created stability that did not rely on enforcement. His conversations became even more deliberate. He spoke in measured tones, often leaving pauses that encouraged reflection. Silence, he understood, made people uncomfortable. In that discomfort, they revealed priorities. Zizzo listened carefully, never interrupting, never rushing. He believed listening was the most underestimated form of control. The city continued to evolve around him. New regulations appeared. Oversight tightened. Technology altered how information traveled. Zizzo adjusted quietly. He reduced exposure to anything unnecessary and reinforced routines that had proven reliable over time. Familiarity, he believed, was safer than novelty. He observed how fear influenced decision-making. Fear made people overreact, while confidence made them careless. Zizzo avoided both extremes. He operated in a narrow space between caution and certainty. This balance allowed him to remain flexible without appearing uncertain. At night, Chicago felt honest again. Without crowds and noise, the city returned to its natural state, still, reflective, predictable. Zizzo valued these hours. He believed that clarity arrived when distractions faded. His thoughts moved slowly, deliberately, reviewing patterns rather than events. Events were temporary. Patterns endured. He did not dwell on the past or speculate about the future. His focus remained firmly on the present moment and its trajectory. He believed that understanding where things were headed mattered more than understanding where they had been. Those who interacted with him often sensed a quiet gravity. Zizzo never raised his voice or displayed urgency, yet his presence influenced behavior. People spoke more carefully around him. They chose words thoughtfully. He did not demand respect. He created an environment where respect felt appropriate. As others chased recognition, Zizzo avoided it entirely. Recognition created records, memories, and expectations. He preferred absence. Absence protected him. If something succeeded quietly, there was no need to be associated with it publicly. If something failed, distance ensured it never reached him. His routines remained unchanged. Routine, he believed, was the foundation of invisibility. Predictable behavior blended into the background. Sudden changes attracted attention. Zizzo changed slowly, almost imperceptibly, allowing adjustments to appear natural rather than reactive. Over time, his influence became more subtle and more effective. He no longer needed to intervene directly. Systems operated smoothly without his presence. This was his preferred outcome. Control that required constant maintenance was fragile. Control that sustained itself was secure. Chicago continued its cycle of renewal and decay. Buildings rose and fell. Neighborhoods transformed. Through it all, Anthony Zizzo remained steady, adapting quietly without ever announcing change. As the city slept, unaware of the calm forces maintaining balance beneath its surface, Zizzo existed in quiet alignment, with his world alert, restrained, and perfectly comfortable in the space between visibility and power. As the years advanced, Anthony Zizzo His approach became less about visible influence and more about invisible guidance. Chicago's underworld, once defined by loud displays and sudden moves, had evolved into a network of subtle exchanges, quiet understandings, and invisible pressures. Zizzo moved within this network like a shadow, never pressing, never shouting, yet always present. He had learned that the loudest voices often caused the greatest disruption, and disruption created risk. He observed patterns not just in people, but in the city itself. Certain blocks, intersections, and neighborhoods carried rhythms that repeated over months, years, and even decades. Construction, commerce, traffic, and labor disputes moved in cycles, while others reacted to individual events. Zizzo studied the recurrent patterns, anticipating challenges long before they materialized. He relied on foresight rather than reaction. One of his greatest strengths was the ability to make people feel secure without ever offering explicit protection. Contractors, union representatives, and business owners sought his counsel quietly. They did not realize that their reliance on him was shaping outcomes they assumed were accidental. Zizzo's influence was not imposed, it was absorbed, subtle and enduring. He continued to value patience above all else. While the impatient rushed into problems and risked exposure, Zizzo allowed situations to unfold at their natural pace. He believed that those who acted too quickly revealed themselves. Those who waited too long lost opportunities. Zizzo found the balance between observation and intervention, stepping in only when the moment truly required his touch. The nights in Chicago remained his sanctuary. When the city's streets emptied and the noise of everyday life faded, clarity emerged. He reviewed minor interactions, noting slight changes in tone, hesitation, or confidence. Every detail mattered. Over time, these observations built a quiet map of behavior, risk, and opportunity that Zizzo could navigate effortlessly. He understood that influence was less about control and more about alignment. When interests naturally aligned, he allowed them to proceed without interference. When they conflicted, he observed until the conflict created tension that required resolution. His resolutions were never dramatic. They were precise, subtle, and effective. People rarely realized a hand had guided the outcome, but the results spoke for themselves. Zizzo, as personal life continued to mirror his professional approach, modest, disciplined, and unassuming. He did not indulge in flamboyance or display wealth. This simplicity provided not just protection, but a consistent environment that allowed him to focus entirely on long-term strategy. Comfort, he believed, was a tool, not a luxury. Excess was distraction. He also recognized the importance of detachment. Personal feelings could cloud judgment, creating vulnerability. He treated relationships as functional, rather than emotional, while still cultivating loyalty through reliability. People trusted him because he delivered consistency. He never made promises he could not keep, nor did he manipulate outcomes for personal gain. Every interaction carried an understated integrity that others sensed even if they could not articulate it. As Chicago grew and changed, the threats surrounding Zizzo became more complex. Federal investigations increased. Surveillance became sophisticated, and new entrants in the underworld sought quick recognition. Many were reckless, their actions betraying their ambitions. Zizzo watched quietly, adjusting his methods to maintain distance from volatility. He trusted that natural attrition would remove those who could not sustain themselves, leaving only the steady. Information remained his most valuable resource. While others collected data indiscriminately, Zizzo focused on relevance. He observed conversations, behaviors, and patterns to extract knowledge efficiently. What he learned shaped decisions long before they became urgent. Action was measured, rarely sudden, and never reactive. His interactions were marked by silence as much as speech. People often interpreted his calm as uncertainty, and that misperception worked to his advantage. Those around him over-explained, revealed too much, or misjudged their own positions. Zizzo listened, absorbing knowledge without revealing himself. Silence became both shield and instrument. Despite his deep integration into Chicago's underworld, Zizzo avoided ego and recognition. He did not seek titles, power symbols, or acknowledgement. Visibility, he understood, invited risk. Remaining in the background allowed him to endure where others faltered. This absence of desire for attention was his most effective defense. Even as decades passed, his discipline never wavered. Routine anchored him. Observation guided him. Patience defined him. Chicago's constant hum became a tool he understood intimately. He navigated its streets, systems, and rhythms with precision, allowing him to anticipate outcomes without need for force or coercion. As night deepened, the quiet city reflected the patterns Zizzo had long studied. Relationships, disputes, opportunities, and threats all moved along predictable paths. Zizzo's understanding of these paths allowed him to remain undisturbed, influencing outcomes subtly, efficiently, and invisibly. His power lay not in fear or spectacle, but in the quiet knowledge that he was present, prepared, and untouchable. Through all this, Anthony Zizzo exemplified a singular truth. Enduring influence does not demand recognition, noise, or drama. It requires observation, patience, discipline, and a profound understanding of human nature. Those who survived longest, he understood, were the ones who adapted quietly, controlled subtly, and moved unseen. He became not just a participant in Chicago's underworld, but its silent anchor, a stabilizing force that operated beyond attention and beyond exposure. Anthony Zizzo had learned that the most critical lessons in Chicago's underworld were never taught in moments of chaos. They were taught in quiet hours, in spaces where nothing seemed to happen, yet everything was being observed. He understood that influence was less about action and more about timing. The world rewarded those who could wait, who could calculate, and who could respond only when absolutely necessary. He studied the behaviors of others with an almost clinical patience. Patterns of speech, hesitation, and focus revealed far more than words themselves. Zizzo noticed the way ambition caused people to overextend, the way insecurity prompted unnecessary disclosure, and the subtle manner in which power sought acknowledgement. He learned to navigate these nuances, using observation as both shield and compass. Chicago continued to shift, its landscape altered by economic development, migration, and political pressure. Streets that once felt familiar now held new faces and new routines. Zizzo adapted seamlessly. He did not resist change, he measured it, understood it, and integrated it into his quiet control. He moved through neighborhoods without leaving footprints, influencing outcomes without overt action. Relationships around him had become more refined. Trust was no longer granted freely, nor was it withheld capriciously. It was earned over repeated interactions, through the demonstration of reliability and discretion. People sought Zizzo not for orders, but for clarity, the reassurance that matters would resolve predictably. In this way, his presence stabilized environments without anyone ever noticing his hand. Zizzo's discipline was a constant. He avoided distraction, excess, and visible displays of influence. His habits were deliberate and unbroken. By maintaining consistency, he minimized risk and preserved his capacity to act when subtle intervention was required. His influence did not rely on intimidation, but on quiet predictability. People aligned themselves naturally, responding to the environment he created rather than directives he issued. Nighttime offered him perspective. When the city's activity slowed, he reflected on emerging patterns and subtle shifts. Changes in commerce, labor movement, and even casual conversation provided him with insight into human behavior. He could anticipate tensions, prevent unnecessary friction, and guide outcomes without ever being seen. This quiet management became his signature. He understood that most failures in his environment were caused by overreaction. Panic, impatience, and overt displays of control led to mistakes. Zizzo remained calm, never rushed, and allowed others to act first. He watched carefully, allowing the rhythm of human behavior to reveal truths that would otherwise remain hidden. When he did act, it was precise, measured, and effective. Despite his integration into powerful networks, Zizzo avoided personal visibility. He did not seek titles, honors, or public acknowledgement. His protection was his invisibility. He operated in spaces where recognition could never reach him. This approach allowed him to survive where others who craved notoriety often faltered. Time, he understood, was an ally. Patience accumulated advantages that force could not. He used time to test character, reveal intentions, and create circumstances that naturally aligned outcomes with his objectives. Actions were rarely reactive. They were anticipated and precise. The city around him, full of people, projects, and constant movement, remained largely unaware of his guiding influence. Decisions were being made, conflicts were being resolved, and systems were functioning with quiet order, all in ways that bore his subtle mark. It was the hallmark of a person who wielded power not through spectacle but through presence. Zizzo's methods were not based on fear, but on understanding. He did not need to assert dominance because he understood the motivations and limitations of those around him. The structure he maintained relied on the natural behavior of people, reinforced by consistent action and the knowledge that outcomes were predictable when he was involved. This indirect influence was stronger and more enduring than any direct intervention. Even as Chicago evolved, Zizzo remained anchored by routines that allowed him to observe without interference. Daily rhythms, measured interactions, and disciplined reflection created an environment where he could operate unchallenged. Change occurred around him, yet he remained a stabilizing presence. Anthony Zizzo had become a figure defined not by overt displays, but by subtle authority. His power was quiet, enduring, and invisible to those untrained in observation. He understood the value of patience, the strength of discretion, and the security of consistency. His presence shaped outcomes, but rarely drew attention. Influence, he knew, was most effective when it appeared to arise naturally without force. In this way, the city continued, and Zizzo remained aligned with its rhythm. Decisions were guided, tensions diffused, and order maintained not through spectacle, but through steady observation and quiet intervention. While others sought recognition or reacted impulsively to fleeting challenges, he endured unmoved, a constant force in a world of subtle, shifting dynamics. As Chicago slept, unaware of the quiet networks and subtle pressure shaping its daily life, Zizzo existed in a state of deliberate calm. He did not chase power or acknowledgement. He simply moved where observation and patience required, ensuring stability, influence, and continuity. In a city that often celebrated the loudest voices while ignoring the quiet ones who truly held sway, Anthony Zizzo had long understood that true mastery of influence relied on observation more than action. The world often rewarded the loudest, most visible gestures, but in Chicago's underworld, survival demanded subtlety. He had spent decades learning to anticipate patterns, to read behavior, and to align outcomes without drawing attention to himself. By this point, his reputation, though not loudly spoken, carried weight in every direction he moved. Zizzo's days followed a rhythm that he alone controlled. Each action was deliberate, each interaction purposeful, and each silence intentional. While others rushed, reacted, and overextended, he moved with precision, allowing events to unfold naturally before stepping in with calculated intervention. He knew that impatience was a danger, one that led to mistakes, and mistakes were often irreversible. In a city as dynamic as Chicago, where neighborhoods shifted and alliances formed and dissolved, in hidden rooms, Zizzo's understanding of stability became his greatest advantage. He recognized that change was constant and inevitable, but its outcomes were predictable if observed carefully. He studied the flow of people, commerce, and labor, tracking the subtle cues that indicated tension, opportunity, or weakness. Over time, this quiet vigilance became his signature, and it allowed him to maintain influence without ever seeking public acknowledgement. Zizzo's presence was rarely noticed, yet felt. Those who had worked with him often described a sense of calm in his presence, a reassurance that problems would resolve predictably. He created environments in which people acted naturally, thinking they were making autonomous decisions, while in reality, their choices aligned with the framework he had quietly established. This indirect influence was more enduring than direct command, more powerful than confrontation, and far less risky. Patience was Zizzo's guiding principle. He waited as others exposed themselves through haste, uncertainty, or greed. He studied how people reacted under stress, how alliances held or faltered, and how ambitions collided with reality. Every observation became a map, every conversation a point of reference. He did not act impulsively, he acted precisely. This careful timing allowed him to mitigate risk, while ensuring his influence remained effective. In his interactions, Zizzo rarely revealed more than necessary. He spoke with intention, often pausing to encourage reflection. Silence was his tool, not absence of thought. Many underestimated him because of this quiet demeanor, assuming that power required visibility. They did not realize that true power often existed in spaces where it could not be measured or changed. Zizzo had mastered that invisibility, and it became a shield as much as a strategy. He avoided the trappings of ego and recognition, Unlike those who sought notoriety or the approval of peers, he valued consistency, reliability, and discretion. His personal life remained unremarkable, grounded in routine and simplicity. He understood that attention was a risk, and that protection lay in the unassuming presentation of normalcy. He did not need to impress, he only needed to endure. Chicago's streets, neighborhoods, and businesses were more than mere scenery. They were a living, breathing network of opportunities and pressures. Zizzo navigated these systems with subtlety, aligning interests where possible and diffusing tension when required. He rarely needed to be physically present. His influence was embedded in the structures he had shaped over decades. Trust, built steadily and reliably, ensured that people acted in accordance with expectations without ever needing instruction. He observed human behavior with the patience of a scholar. Motivation, fear, ambition, and hesitation were all data points. He noted patterns in speech, tone, and body language, using them to anticipate outcomes. While others responded to immediate events, he responded to the trajectories those events revealed. This long-term perspective allowed him to remain stable in a world of constant flux. As new individuals entered Chicago, this underworld, eager to prove themselves, many misjudged the landscape. They moved too quickly, spoke too freely, or allowed ambition to cloud judgment. Zizzo remained detached, allowing natural consequences to unfold. Those who survived learned the importance of discretion. Those who failed reinforced the value of patience. Through observation alone, he managed the balance of power without overt interference. Even as federal attention increased, surveillance grew more sophisticated, and law enforcement tightened scrutiny on organized crime. Zizzo remained unexposed. He adapted quietly, reducing unnecessary interactions, delegating responsibilities through trusted intermediaries, and maintaining routines that shielded him from risk. His strategy relied not on avoidance alone, but on creating circumstance where exposure was unlikely and influence remained effective. At night, the city revealed itself to him in its purest form. Empty streets, quiet businesses, and dim lights reflected a rhythm that few noticed. Zizzo studied this rhythm, aligning his actions with the natural flow rather than attempting to impose force. Predictability, he understood, created control, while disruption invited chaos. His influence was effective precisely because it was integrated seamlessly into existing systems. Anthony Zizzo's enduring success was defined not by visibility, wealth, or notoriety, but by understanding. He comprehended the subtleties of human behavior, the hidden structures of power, and the mechanisms through which outcomes could be influenced indirectly. He did not act for recognition, he acted for preservation, stability, and the long-term alignment of people and circumstances. By mastering patience, observation, and subtle intervention, he maintained authority quietly, efficiently, and effectively. Through decades of change, conflict, and uncertainty, Zizzo remained steady. Others fell to impulsive decisions, reckless ambition, or exposure. He endured, while the city around him celebrated the loud and the visible. He exemplified the quiet, enduring influence of a man who understood that survival, true power, and control were achieved not through noise, but through subtlety, consistency, and calculated restraint. In Chicago, while most saw only the surface, Zizzo's presence shaped outcomes with invisible precision, a testament to the enduring power of patience, silence, and observation. Anthony Zizzo had long realized that the most critical aspects of influence were invisible to most people. While the world around him often celebrated power displayed through wealth, aggression, or notoriety, Zizzo understood that lasting authority existed in the quiet spaces between observation and action. The city of Chicago, with its shifting neighborhoods, growing industries, and evolving social networks, offered countless opportunities for subtle guidance, and Zizzo had mastered the art of shaping outcomes without drawing attention to himself. His approach was methodical. Every day he observed not just events, but the small, almost imperceptible patterns that preceded them. A slight change in tone during a meeting, the hesitant step of an ambitious newcomer, or the casual decision to delay a transaction each provided clues about intentions, priorities, and vulnerabilities. He learned to interpret these signals as clearly as a map, tracing paths to outcomes before they became unavoidable. Action, when required, was measured, precise, and often so subtle that those involved did not recognize his hand at work. Zizzo had no interest in fame or public acknowledgement. Recognition, he knew, brought scrutiny and risk. Instead, he invested in consistency, reliability, and discretion. People learned that when Zizzo was involved, matters resolved smoothly, even when the details remained unseen. Contractors, business owners, union figures, and even rivals sought his counsel quietly, drawn not by fear but by the sense that his involvement would preserve stability. He never imposed, he facilitated. This invisible guidance created trust and ensured influence without force. Patience remained Zizzo's defining virtue. Many in Chicago's underworld reacted impulsively, chasing power through aggressive moves or loud declaration. These behaviors often led to mistakes, exposure, or unintended consequences. Zizzo observed without judgment, waiting for natural patterns to emerge. He intervened only when necessary, and when he did, it was in a manner that appeared ordinary, inevitable, and unobtrusive. By letting others act first, he gained insight while minimizing his own risk. He recognized that stability relied on understanding the motivations and behaviors of people, not the systems themselves. Buildings, streets, and businesses were merely settings for human actions, which created opportunities, challenges, and conflicts. By studying these behaviors carefully, Zizzo could anticipate outcomes long before they materialized. He relied on observation rather than reaction, on foresight rather than force. Silence was his greatest tool. While others spoke hastily, revealing intentions or misjudging situations, Zizzo used pauses, measured words, and restraint to gather information. The quiet made others uneasy, prompting them to reveal more than they intended. He rarely raised his voice or asserted dominance. His influence worked in the spaces between spoken words. It was invisible, yet profound, guiding outcomes without confrontation. Even as Chicago evolved technologically, socially, and economically, Zizzo remained adaptive. He recognized that change was constant, but human nature rarely shifted. Greed, fear, ambition, and insecurity persisted across decades. By building systems and relationships that accounted for these constants, he remained resilient. Moved through evolving neighborhoods, expanding industries, and shifting social landscape without drawing attention, blending seamlessly into the city while quietly shaping it. Trust was cultivated deliberately. Zizzo never assumed loyalty. He earned it through reliability and discretion. He did not manipulate people through threats or promises, but by ensuring that engagement were predictable, outcomes were dependable, and consequences were understood. This steady consistency became a form of unspoken authority. People trusted that working with him would create stability, and they adjusted their behavior accordingly. At night, when the city settled and activity waned, Zizzo found clarity. He reviewed patterns, reflected on interactions, and adjusted his understanding of unfolding dynamics. These quiet hours were essential. They allowed him to anticipate tensions, resolve potential conflicts, and ensure the smooth operation of systems without ever needing to intervene dramatically. He measured time as a resource, knowing that patient observation often achieved more than hasty action. Zizzo avoided unnecessary exposure. His personal life was modest, his routines consistent, and his presence deliberately unassuming. He understood that visibility attracted risk. By maintaining discretion in both his professional and personal spheres, he preserved his ability to act without interference. This invisibility was not passive, it was strategic, protecting him while enhancing his influence. The environment around him continued to test his skills. New personalities entered Chicago as Underworld, eager to demonstrate power or secure quick advancement. Many overestimated their understanding of the system, moving recklessly and exposing themselves. Zizzo observed these newcomers, allowing natural consequences to unfold, while quietly guiding the environment to prevent destabilization. In this way, he reinforced patterns of behavior that ensured continuity and minimized disruption. Even in the face of increasing law enforcement scrutiny, surveillance, and societal change, Zizzo adapted. He streamlined operations, delegated responsibilities through trusted intermediaries, and reduced exposure to potential threats. His interventions remained subtle, precise, and effective, maintaining authority without drawing attention. Influence, he understood, was most enduring when it appeared to arise naturally rather than being imposed through overt force. Through all this, Anthony Zizzo exemplified the quiet power of patience, observation, and disciplined action. He demonstrated that influence did not require spectacle, that control did not require visibility, and that stability was achieved not by force, but by understanding. His presence, though rarely acknowledged, shaped the city in profound ways. Outcomes aligned with his subtle guidance, conflicts resolved with minimal disruption, and systems operated smoothly because of the unseen patterns he cultivated over decades. In a world dominated by noise, ambition, and impulsive action, Zizzo remained constant. While others faltered, overreached, or drew unwanted attention, he endured. Chicago's rhythm, full of opportunity and tension, moved around him, and he moved with it. Unseen, measured, and unbroken, he was a silent anchor in a turbulent environment, a man whose authority rested not on intimidation, but on understanding, patience, and the quiet mastery of subtle influence. Anthony Zizzo had learned over the years that influence in Chicago, as Underworld, was rarely earned through force or spectacle. Real power was subtle, quiet, and persistent. The world often mistook noise for authority, but Zizzo knew that loud gestures drew attention, and attention was the enemy of longevity. Instead, he moved like water, flowing through networks, filling gaps, and shaping outcomes in ways that were invisible to most. To the untrained eye, nothing seemed extraordinary about his actions, yet their effects were profound and lasting. He observed that the most critical leverage came from understanding human behavior, not controlling it overtly. People revealed themselves through patterns, habitual speech, repeated choice, and the small, often unnoticed signals that accompanied each action. Zizzo trained himself to detect these subtle cues, interpreting them as accurately as one might read a map. The information he gathered allowed him to anticipate conflict, guide decisions, and stabilize volatile situations without ever appearing to intervene. Timing more than action defined his effectiveness. Chicago itself became both classroom and tool. Its streets, buildings, and neighborhoods were more than geography. They were living systems with rhythms, routines, and flows. Certain areas experienced predictable cycles of commerce, labor disputes, or social tension. Zizzo studied these movements, not to control them directly, but to understand when and where influence could be applied quietly. His interventions were always precise, occurring at points where small adjustments could ripple outward to produce substantial results. Relationships in his world were defined by reliability. Zizzo never relied on fear or intimidation to command loyalty. He relied on consistency. If he said something would happen, it did. If he remained silent, the silence itself carried meaning. Over decades, he became known for discretion, an individual whose involvement assured resolution without drama. People sought his guidance not because he demanded it, but because working within his framework guaranteed predictability, stability, and the avoidance of unnecessary risk. Silence remained one of his most potent tools. In conversations, Zizzo spoke with intention, often pausing to encourage reflection, allowing others to reveal information without realizing it. His ability to listen, to truly observe, without inserting his ego, set him apart from many others who relied on forceful presence. Those around him often misinterpreted this quiet as uncertainty, while in reality, it was careful calculation. He understood that the moment one appears uncertain, even slightly, risk escalates. Control required the mastery of perception. Patience was not passive. It was a strategic discipline. Zizzo allowed events to unfold naturally, letting others act first while he absorbed knowledge, calculated potential outcomes, and determined the precise moment to intervene. Many made mistakes because they moved too quickly or sought recognition too eagerly. Zizzo, by contrast, moved slowly, deliberately, and with full awareness. He understood that influence applied subtly over time outlasted any temporary advantage gained through force or aggression. He maintained a distance from unnecessary exposure. Public attention, over displays of influence, and flamboyant gestures were distractions he could ill afford. His personal life remained modest, his routines deliberate, and his presence largely invisible. By keeping his personal and professional spheres controlled and predictable, he preserved not only safety but also strategic advantage. He operated in a space where few noticed him, Yet the results of his influence were undeniable to those who understood outcomes. Even as Chicago's underworld evolved, new personalities emerged, federal scrutiny increased, and social systems shifted. Zizzo adapted seamlessly. He understood that change was constant, but human nature rarely shifted. Greed, ambition, fear, and desire remained consistent through decades. By anchoring his strategies in these constants, he remained effective across generations. New players often miscalculated, exposing themselves with haste or arrogance. Zizzo allowed them to reveal their vulnerabilities while he maintained a consistent, calm presence. The rhythm of the city at night offered him clarity. Empty streets, quiet neighborhoods, and fading lights revealed patterns invisible during daylight hours. He would review subtle shifts in behavior, trace emerging tensions, and prepare strategies for intervention without drawing attention. His presence became a stabilizing force, unseen and undetected, yet deeply effective. Events aligned with predictable patterns because he had cultivated understanding over decades of observation. Trust in Zizzo's world was earned, not assumed. He built relationships through consistent, discreet action, and avoided manipulations that would create dependency. People learned that his reliability was unshakable. This quiet, steady approach ensured that influence became a natural outcome of interaction rather than an imposed condition. Through subtle guidance, conflicts were resolved, opportunities maximized, and the delicate equilibrium of networks maintained. Zizzo's mastery of subtlety extended to timing. He did not act impulsively, and he rarely made decisions based solely on immediate circumstances. Instead, he waited for the moment when minimal effort could yield maximum impact. He understood that influence applied too early could create resistance, while influence applied too late risked irrelevance. His interventions were precise, measured, and often imperceptible to those involved. The results, however, spoke volumes. Even as the decades progressed, Anthony Zizzo remained unshaken by the turbulence around him. He did not seek fame, wealth, or acknowledgement. His focus was on stability, understanding, and preservation. The city's systems continued to operate under his subtle guidance, unseen but enduring. Chicago changed around him, but he remained a constant, a stabilizing presence who shaped outcomes without need for visibility. Through this approach, he demonstrated a fundamental principle. Lasting influence does not require spectacle. Authority that depends on intimidation, aggression, or recognition is fragile and fleeting. Enduring influence is quiet, deliberate, and rooted in understanding, observation, and the careful cultivation of patterns. Zizzo's success was defined not by headlines or notoriety, but by the invisible network of outcomes he guided across decades. As Chicago slept, unaware of the steady, unseen hand-guiding aspects of its underworld, Zizzo existed in quiet control. He was present without being conspicuous, influential without needing recognition, and calm amidst constant motion. His mastery of patience, discretion, and observation ensured that stability endured, outcomes aligned naturally, and the city's subtle systems functioned effectively under his invisible oversight. In the end, Anthony Zizzo's power lay not in noise, display, or aggression, but in the quiet certainty of knowledge, the deliberate application of timing, and the steady, unassuming presence of a man who had mastered the art of enduring influence. Anthony Zizzo's understanding of power had deepened over the years, and by this stage, he had become a figure defined not by what was seen, but by what was unseen. Chicago's underworld had shifted, grown more intricate, and more delicate. Yet the principles that governed it remained consistent. Control was earned through patience. Influence was exerted quietly, and survival depended on the subtle orchestration of events rather than loud confrontation. Zizzo moved through this world like a conductor, guiding complex patterns with a steady hand while avoiding the spotlight that could compromise him. Observation was at the heart of his strategy. He studied not just actions, but the motivations behind them. He noticed hesitation, confidence, fear, and ambition, tracking how these qualities shaped decisions and interactions. Over time, these observations became predictive. Zizzo could anticipate how disputes might escalate, how alliances could falter, and how opportunities would arise. He rarely needed to act immediately. The foresight he developed allowed him to intervene at the precise moment when the smallest adjustment could yield the greatest effect. He understood that most mistakes in the underworld were emotional. Impulsiveness, Arrogance and fear drove individuals to reveal too much, make hasty choices, or misjudge situations. Zizzo, by contrast, maintained calm at all times. He allowed events to unfold naturally, absorbing information while others exposed themselves. His interventions were subtle, almost imperceptible, yet their impact was lasting. Influence, in his hands, required no spectacle. It thrived in the quiet. Relationships around him were maintained with careful discretion. Zizzo never relied on threats or intimidation, nor did he seek to manipulate others overtly. Instead, he cultivated reliability. People learned that working with him meant consistency, clarity, and resolution. Loyalty emerged organically because expectations were clear and fulfilled. He avoided unnecessary entanglements, keeping both personal and professional spheres predictable. This consistency reinforced his authority without ever demanding it. The rhythms of the city provided structure and insight. Chicago's streets, businesses, and neighborhoods operated within predictable cycles. Some cycles were economic, tied to trade and labor. Others were social, influenced by alliances, disputes, and generational shifts. Zizzo studied these rhythms carefully. He moved in alignment with them, intervening only where subtle adjustments were required. In this way, he maintained influence without ever being overtly visible, allowing systems to operate naturally while guiding outcomes toward stability. Silence was one of his most powerful tools. In conversations, he spoke deliberately, leaving pauses that encouraged others to reveal more than intended. This quiet made people uneasy, prompting them to disclose intentions, reveal priorities, or expose weaknesses. Zizzo listened carefully, interpreting these signals with precision. His own presence conveyed assurance without needing to assert dominance, creating an environment where decisions aligned with his guidance, without overt instruction. He avoided excess in all areas of life. Wealth, visibility, and power, when flaunted, drew attention and risk. Zizzo preferred moderation. His routines were consistent, his presence low profile, and his habits disciplined. This restraint served as both shield and strategic advantage. By blending into the ordinary, he minimized exposure while maximizing influence. Even as new personalities entered Chicago's underworld, ambitious and impatient, Zizzo adapted seamlessly. He did not confront recklessness directly. Instead, he allowed natural consequences to unfold while ensuring that critical structures remained intact. He observed how greed and impatience created mistakes and used these insights to reinforce stability, subtly guiding the environment to maintain balance. Those who survived learned the importance of patience and discretion. Those who failed highlighted the value of restraint. Time was an ally. Zizzo understood that decisions made too quickly risked error, and decisions made too late risked irrelevance. He acted only when timing aligned perfectly with desired outcomes. This patient approach allowed him to maintain control without overt displays of power. Influence in his hands was a gentle but persistent force, shaping events quietly and effectively, even under increasing scrutiny from law enforcement. As surveillance became more sophisticated and attention to organized crime intensified, Zizzo maintained distance. He delegated responsibilities carefully, ensured operational layers insulated him, and minimized exposure to volatile situations. His methods were deliberate and preventative, relying on subtle adjustments rather than overt interventions. By operating beneath the surface, he preserved both safety and control. Zizzo's understanding of human nature remained central to his effectiveness. Ambition, fear, desire, and insecurity were constants across decades. By anchoring his strategies in these predictable elements, he maintained influence through changing circumstances. He recognized that while technology, law enforcement, and social trends evolved, human behavior, its motivations, and errors remained largely unchanged. Mastery lay in understanding these patterns and responding with subtlety and foresight. The city at night offered insight and perspective. Empty streets, quiet neighborhoods, and fading lights revealed rhythms that were obscured during daylight. Zizzo reviewed these patterns, assessed emerging tensions, and refined his strategies without drawing attention. His interventions were deliberate, targeted, and nearly invisible, yet they shaped outcomes significantly. Systems remained stable, conflicts resolved, and opportunities maximized, all without obvious interference. Anthony Zizzo. His power was defined not by spectacle, confrontation, or notoriety, but by quiet mastery. Influence was exerted through understanding, observation, and the precise timing of action. His authority persisted because it was invisible yet enduring, trusted yet unassuming. Outcomes aligned naturally under his subtle guidance, and the environment he navigated remained stable because he had cultivated both knowledge and patience over decades. Through calm, steady observation and deliberate action, he maintained control in a world that celebrated noise and impulsiveness but rarely endured the subtle, disciplined power he exemplified. In the quiet hours of the city, as Chicago moved through the night, Zizzo existed as both participant and observer. He shaped outcomes without recognition, guided decisions without instruction, and maintained balance without drawing attention. In the end, his enduring influence rested not on aggression or spectacle, but on patience, discretion, and the steady, unassuming presence of a man who had mastered the art of subtle, lasting power. Anthony Zizzo had long come to understand the true influence in Chicago. His Underworld was less about what one did openly and more about what remained unseen. Power, he realized, existed in subtlety, in timing, in the careful orchestration of events that unfolded naturally. He had spent decades perfecting the skill of guiding outcomes without drawing attention to himself, shaping the course of relationships, businesses, and decisions quietly, with precision. To those outside his inner circle, his impact often went unnoticed, yet it resonated across the city in ways that could not be ignored. He observed the behaviors of people constantly, noting patterns that others overlooked: hesitation, a fleeting expression, a shift in tone, or a minor deviation from routine. These small signals contained more insight than months of overt action. Zizzo trained himself to notice them, interpreting each as a clue about intentions, ambitions, and vulnerabilities. By understanding these subtleties, he could anticipate conflicts, recognize opportunity, and subtly influence decisions before anyone realized a hand had guided the outcome. Zizzo's approach was grounded in patience. He waited while others acted impulsively, allowing natural consequence to expose truth and reveal the strengths or weaknesses of individuals. Those who rushed, overreached, or sought recognition too quickly often faltered. Zizzo learned from every observation, storing knowledge that would serve him in later decisions. His interventions were deliberate, measured, and effective, occurring at moments when minimal effort could yield the maximum result. His influence was strengthened by consistency. He never promised more than he could deliver, nor did he overextend himself. People came to understand that his involvement brought clarity and resolution. Trust was cultivated slowly, built on reliable action rather than force or intimidation. Zizzo's reputation grew quietly because of his discipline and discretion, and the subtle authority that emanated from his steady presence. Those who sought to challenge him rarely realized they were already operating within parameters he had shaped. The city itself was a tool in his hands, a network of interactions, movements, and rhythms that could be read like a map. Chicago's neighborhoods, businesses, and streets had inherent cycles, economic fluctuations, social patterns, and shifting networks of influence. Zizzo studied these cycles carefully, understanding when and where intervention could guide outcomes with precision. By moving in harmony with these rhythms, he preserved stability and avoided unnecessary exposure, allowing influence to take root naturally. Silence was as important as action. Zizzo rarely spoke more than necessary. In conversations, pauses encouraged others to reveal information unintentionally. His restraint made people uneasy, prompting disclosure while he remained calm and measured. He rarely revealed his intentions, and the very ambiguity of his presence enhanced his authority. People adjusted their behavior to align with his expectations, often without realizing it, reinforcing the subtle but enduring impact of his influence. He avoided flamboyance, excess, and unnecessary visibility. In an environment where attention could lead to exposure, he cultivated simplicity and discretion. His personal life reflected this philosophy. Modest routines, low-profile habits, and deliberate interactions minimized risk and maximized control. He operated in spaces where his presence was undetected, yet the results of his guidance were tangible and lasting. Zizzo's understanding of human nature was foundational to his strategy. Fear, ambition, greed, and insecurity remained constants across generations. By aligning his approach with these unchanging aspects of behavior, he maintained influence through decades of social, economic, and political change. New personalities entered the underworld, eager to make their mark, often acting hastily or recklessly. Zizzo observed without interference, letting natural outcomes occur while subtly reinforcing stability. Those who survived learned patience and restraint. Those who failed underscored the importance of measured action. Time was his ally. He understood that premature action risked resistance and misalignment, while delayed action risked irrelevance. He acted at moments where small adjustments could ripple outward, shaping events efficiently. His interventions rarely needed force. They relied instead on strategic placement, careful timing, and the guidance of systems already in motion. Influence, in Zizzo's hands, was gentle, almost invisible, yet profoundly effective. Even as law enforcement increased scrutiny, surveillance became more sophisticated, and the dynamics of the underworld shifted. Zizzo remained adaptive. He streamlined interactions, delegated responsibilities through trusted intermediaries, and maintained routines that insulated him from risk. His leadership was preventative rather than reactive. He created conditions that minimized conflict and optimized outcomes without exposing himself to danger or attention. The quiet orchestration of events became his signature. Anthony Zizzo's strength lay in the combination of observation, patience, and subtle action. He did not rely on confrontation, intimidation, or public displays of power. Instead, he maintained authority through understanding, precision, and the steady cultivation of trust. Outcomes aligned naturally, disputes resolved without disruption, and the networks around him operated with reliability and efficiency. This invisible influence allowed him to endure in a world where impulsiveness, ego, and recklessness often led to downfall. Nighttime in Chicago offered him clarity. The streets emptied, lights dimmed, and the city's pulse slowed. These quiet hours revealed the underlying rhythms of human behavior and activity, allowing him to reassess, observe, and refine his strategies. Patterns emerged that could be navigated and adjusted with minimal effort, ensuring stability and continuity. His presence was steady, unremarkable to the untrained eye, yet every decision, adjustment, and observation reinforced his enduring influence. Through decades of transformation, Anthony Zizzo exemplified a singular truth. True power does not demand visibility, drama, or recognition. It is rooted in observation, patience, and subtle intervention. While others overreached, exposed themselves, or succumbed to impulsive actions, he endured. Chicago moved around him, its energy, conflict, and opportunity shaped by his quiet guidance. In every interaction, every pattern observed, and every decision subtly influenced, Zizzo demonstrated that lasting control is the result of discipline, knowledge, and the artful management of influence that remains unseen yet profoundly effective. In the quiet hours, as the city slept, he existed as a stabilizing force. People acted within systems he had subtly reinforced, conflicts dissolved before escalation, and opportunities unfolded in alignment with the structure he had cultivated over decades. Anthony Zizzo, his mastery of subtle influence, patient observation, and deliberate action ensured that he remained unchallenged, effective, and enduring a silent power in a world that often celebrated noise and visibility over quiet mastery. Anthony Zizzo's life had become a study in quiet mastery. He had long understood that in Chicago, as Underworld, the loudest voices often invited the most risk. Those who sought recognition, notoriety, or visible dominance frequently faltered, their ambitions exposing vulnerabilities that could not be concealed. Zizzo moved differently. His influence was subtle, continuous, and nearly imperceptible. He acted less and observed more, allowing patterns to emerge before intervening, in ways that aligned outcomes naturally with his intentions. Over time, this approach created a network of stability that few could fully perceive. Observation had become second nature. Zizzo noticed every nuance and alteration in tone, a pause in speech, a change in routine. These small signals revealed motivations, intentions, and potential conflicts. While others reacted to immediate events, Zizzo studied trajectories, predicting outcomes in advance. His interventions were deliberate, occurring only when timing allowed the greatest effect with minimal exposure. In this way, influence became both efficient and enduring. Patience was his greatest tool. He waited while others acted impulsively, watching mistakes unfold and lessons become apparent. People revealed themselves in how they responded to pressure, competition, and opportunity. Zizzo used these insights to guide future decisions, choosing the precise moment to step in, redirect, or reinforce. Action was measured. It was never reactive, never hasty, and never unnecessary. He understood that relationships were most valuable when founded on reliability rather than coercion. Zizzo cultivated loyalty through consistent action, clear expectations, and discretion. People trusted him because he delivered predictably, not because he demanded submission. This form of influence, rooted in quiet authority, created networks that were self-sustaining. Those within them acted as though decisions were autonomous, even when subtle guidance had shaped the path. Chicago itself was more than a backdrop, it was an instrument. Zizzo understood the rhythms of the city, its commerce, its neighborhoods, and its social interactions. Certain streets, businesses, and blocks had predictable patterns, influenced by cycles of work, leisure, and necessity. By observing these flows, he could anticipate tension, opportunity, and risk. He intervened when minor adjustments could produce maximum effect, never forcing outcomes but guiding them subtly. Silence remained a central tactic. In conversations, Zizzo spoke sparingly, allowing pauses to elicit revelation. People often disclosed intentions without realizing it, filling the quiet spaces with information. His calm presence encouraged transparency, yet concealed his own strategies. This measured approach fostered influence without confrontation, ensuring that control remained invisible yet effective. He avoided unnecessary exposure in all areas of life. Fame, wealth, and public recognition attracted attention that could compromise safety. Zizzo preferred simplicity, discretion, and routine. His personal life mirrored his professional philosophy, structured, controlled, and unassuming. By remaining inconspicuous, he minimized risk while maximizing capacity to act strategically. Zizzo's mastery extended to the management of emerging talent and new entrants into the underworld. Ambition, impatience, and recklessness often characterized these individuals. He observed their behavior, allowed natural consequences to unfold, and subtly guided them to ensure that critical systems remained intact. Mistakes by newcomers reinforced the importance of patience and discretion. Those who survived learned lessons that could not be taught by words alone. Time was his ally, and he treated it with precision. Premature action risked resistance, while delayed action risked irrelevance. Zizzo acted only when the moment aligned with desired outcomes. His patience allowed him to apply minimal effort for maximum effect. Influence in his hands was gentle yet enduring, shaping results without force or spectacle. Even as law enforcement and public scrutiny intensified, Zizzo maintained a strategic distance. He delegated responsibilities through trusted intermediaries, insulated himself from volatility, and streamlined interactions to reduce exposure. His leadership was preventative, not reactive. He influenced outcomes before problems fully emerged, a quiet architect of stability whose work was often invisible to outsiders. His understanding of human behavior remained the foundation of his success. He recognized that fear, greed, ambition, and insecurity persisted across decades and generations. By aligning strategies with these constants, he maintained influence through decades of social, economic, and political change. New players frequently overestimated their control, but Zizzo's steady, calculated guidance preserved equilibrium while remaining unseen. Nighttime offered him clarity. The quiet streets, dim lights, and fading activity revealed subtle patterns in behavior and movement. Zizzo would review shifts in alliances, emerging conflicts, and economic fluctuations, adjusting strategies to maintain balance. Minimal interventions produced ripple effects that stabilized situations and maximized opportunity. His presence was steady and invisible, yet its impact was profound. Anthony Zizzo's power was defined not by visibility, spectacle, or aggression, but by subtle mastery. Influence was exerted through observation, timing, and deliberate action rather than force. Trust was earned through reliability, and control was achieved by guiding natural patterns rather than imposing them. Disputes were resolved quietly, decisions aligned smoothly, and networks operated efficiently, all under his unseen hand. Through decades of change, turmoil, and evolution in Chicago, Zizzo endured. Others faltered due to impatience, visibility, or impulsiveness. He remained a stabilizing force, a silent architect of outcomes, guiding directions and systems without attracting attention. The city moved around him, yet he navigated its complexities effortlessly, blending into ordinary spaces while shaping extraordinary results. His influence was quiet, precise, and enduring, a testament to the power of observation, patience, and subtle, disciplined control. In the quiet hours, as Chicago slept, Anthony Zizzo existed as a constant presence. His guidance was imperceptible yet effective, shaping outcomes, diffusing conflict, and preserving stability. He demonstrated that enduring authority comes not from spectacle, recognition, or confrontation, but from careful observation, strategic patience, and the quiet, consistent exercise of influence. He was the unseen force, steady and unbroken, whose presence shaped the city without ever needing acknowledgement. Anthony Zizzo had come to understand that the true essence of influence was invisible. In a city like Chicago, where ambition often collided with impatience and pride, those who shouted the loudest rarely endured. Zizzo's strength lay in restraint and observation and in subtle orchestration. He moved through the intricate networks of power like a silent navigator, guiding outcomes with drawing attention to himself, shaping behavior through example, anticipation, and discretion. By this point in his life, his presence was a quiet, stabilizing force, imperceptible yet profoundly effective. He approached every day with deliberate attention to detail. Each conversation, each movement, each transaction in the city's underworld was an opportunity to learn, observe, and influence. He did not rely on force or intimidation, because he understood that such tactics drew attention and risk. Instead, he built influence through consistency. Those who interacted with him repeatedly came to understand that engagement with Zizzo brought reliability, clarity, and predictability. Loyalty was earned not through fear, but through the quiet assurance that matters would resolve naturally under his guidance. Observation remained his most powerful tool. He studied behavior, tone, and patterns, noting hesitation, confidence, and subtle shifts in demeanor. Over decades, he developed a near-perfect understanding of human behavior. Under pressure, particularly in environments of competition and ambition, small gestures often carried more meaning than words, and minor inconsistencies revealed hidden motivation. Zizzo read these signals carefully, using them to predict outcomes and craft interventions that were precise, deliberate, and effective. Patience was a cornerstone of his strategy. While others acted impulsively, attempting to assert power or gain recognition, Zizzo waited. He allowed situations to unfold, watching for natural outcomes, mistakes, and opportunities. By acting only when timing was optimal, he maximized effect while minimizing risk. His interventions were subtle, often. Those affected had no idea that a guiding hand had steered events. Influence, he knew, was most enduring when it appeared organic rather than imposed. Chicago's neighborhoods and systems were more than mere settings. They were instruments for observation and strategy. Zizzo understood the ebb and flow of commerce, labor, and social network, recognizing predictable cycles and points of vulnerability. By moving in harmony with these rhythms, he maintained influence and stability without imposing disruption. His guidance ensured that outcomes aligned naturally with desired objectives, often before anyone realized intervention had occurred. Silence continued to be a potent tool. Zizzo spoke sparingly, leaving pauses in conversation that prompted others to reveal intentions, ambitions, or concerns without realizing it. His calm presence was a stabilizing influence, encouraging transparency while masking his own plans. He never needed to assert dominance. His authority emerged organically from consistent action, reliability, and the subtle shaping of circumstances. He avoided excess and unnecessary exposure, public recognition, flamboyant displays of power, or overt acts of influence attracted risk. Zizzo preferred a life of simplicity, discretion, and consistency. His personal routines mirrored his professional philosophy: deliberate, controlled, and unassuming. By blending into ordinary spaces, he minimized vulnerability while maximizing capacity to observe and act effectively. Managing new entrants to the underworld required particular subtlety. Ambitious individuals often acted hastily, revealing flaws that could destabilize networks. Zizzo observed, allowed consequences to unfold, and subtly reinforced stability when necessary. Through careful guidance, he ensured that emerging players adapted to the existing structure rather than destabilizing it. The city's underworld operated efficiently because his influence shaped behavior and maintained equilibrium without overt enforcement. Time was treated as an ally rather than a constraint. Zizzo knew that action taken too early could provoke resistance, while delayed action could render it ineffective. He applied intervention at the precise moment where minimal effort achieved maximum impact. Influence in his hands was quiet, strategic, and enduring. It was never about domination. It was about alignment and foresight, creating conditions where desired outcomes occurred naturally. Even as law enforcement intensified scrutiny and the underworld became more complex, Zizzo adapted seamlessly. He insulated himself through careful delegation, maintained protective routines, and preserved strategic discretion. His influence was preventative rather than reactive. He anticipated potential disruption and guided systems quietly before crisis could emerge. By staying beneath the surface, he preserved safety, control, and the continuity of his networks. Understanding human nature was the foundation of his success. Zizzo recognized constants, greed, fear, ambition, and desire endure across decades. By building strategies around these predictable qualities, he maintained relevance and influence even as external circumstances shifted. New players, unaware of the subtleties of the environment, often overreached and failed. Zizzo's quiet guidance ensured that the city's underworld continued to function smoothly despite constant change. The city at night provided unparalleled insight as streets emptied and lights dimmed. Hidden rhythms became visible. Zizzo could trace movements, anticipate tensions, and assess opportunities in ways obscured during daylight. Minimal interventions could then be applied to maximize stability and outcomes. His presence remained discreet. Yet every adjustment, every observation, and every decision reinforced order across the networks he monitored. Anthony Zizzo's power was not the product of aggression, recognition, or spectacle. It was rooted in observation, patience, and subtle intervention. Authority was earned through consistency, reliability, and the shaping of environments to support desired outcomes. Conflicts were resolved quietly, decisions aligned naturally, and networks operated effectively under his guidance. Influence was invisible but enduring, a testament to the art of discretion and strategic mastery. Over decades, Zizzo exemplified the principle that true power does not need visibility to endure. While others faltered due to impulsiveness, arrogance, or exposure, he persisted. Chicago moved and evolved around him, yet he navigated its complexity effortlessly, blending into ordinary spaces while shaping extraordinary results. His influence was subtle, strategic, and enduring, a quiet presence that ensured the smooth operation of systems and the preservation of stability across generations. In the still hours of the city, as the bustle faded and the underworld rested, Anthony Zizzo existed as a silent anchor. His guidance was unseen yet effective, shaping outcomes, diffusing potential conflicts, and maintaining balance. He demonstrated that enduring authority comes not from force or recognition but from patience, observation, and the subtle, deliberate exercise of influence. He was a constant, unbroken, and unassuming force, a master of the quiet art of control. Anthony Zizzo had long realized that the true measure of power was subtlety. In Chicago's intricate underworld, the loudest, most conspicuous players often drew attention they could not withstand. Reputation alone could be dangerous, and visibility could invite both envy and scrutiny. Zizzo moved differently. His influence was quiet, precise, and pervasive, shaped by decades of observation and disciplined action. He understood that control was not in confrontation, but in shaping pattern, predicting behavior, and gently steering events so that outcome unfolded naturally, aligning with his intentions without forcing them. Every day, Zizzo's awareness of the city and its people deepened. He observed interactions in businesses, social circles, and neighborhoods, noting subtle cues, gestures, hesitations, shifts in tone that revealed intentions and potential vulnerabilities, while others reacted impulsively, exposing themselves through haste or ego. Zizzo waited, absorbing information and mapping possibilities. These observations became predictive tools. He could anticipate conflict, recognize opportunity, and guide decisions long before outcomes were apparent to anyone else. Patience remained his most powerful asset. He allowed others to act first, learning from their mistakes and their decisions. Ambition often led newcomers to overreach, exposing weaknesses that Zizzo could note without interference. When he did act, It was at the precise moment where minimal adjustment could produce the maximum effect. This timing, combined with subtle influence, ensured stability and long-lasting results. Action, in his hands, was quiet yet profoundly effective. He cultivated relationships based on reliability and discretion. People trusted him not out of fear, but because consistency defined every interaction. If Zizzo said a situation would resolve in a certain way, it did. His presence reassured, and his silence often guided. Authority emerged naturally from his ability to predict, influence, and resolve without overt imposition. The networks around him functioned seamlessly because trust had been quietly built over years, sustained by consistent outcomes. Chicago itself was an instrument he read like a map. Streets, neighborhoods, and commercial centers had inherent rhythms, shaped by labor, commerce, social dynamics, and human behavior. Zizzo tracked these flows, identifying points where subtle adjustments could maintain equilibrium or create opportunity. He moved in harmony with these rhythms, intervening sparingly but effectively. His influence shaped the city's underworld without confrontation or spectacle, aligning events so that stability prevailed even amidst volatility. Silence was one of his strongest tools. He spoke sparingly, allowing pauses in conversation to encourage disclosure. Ambition, fear, or greed often revealed itself in the spaces left by silence. Zizzo listened carefully, interpreting what was unspoken as accurately as what was said. His own restraint communicated control without dominance. Those around him acted naturally, unaware that a guiding force had shaped the trajectory of their decisions. He avoided ostentation and unnecessary exposure. Fame, wealth, and public recognition attracted scrutiny, which could destabilize influence. Zizzo preferred simplicity, routine, and discretion. His personal life mirrored his professional approach, structured, controlled, and unobtrusive. By remaining invisible to those outside his circle, he preserved freedom to observe and act strategically, maintaining influence without risking vulnerability. Managing newcomers to the underworld required a delicate balance. Ambitious or reckless individuals often overestimated their understanding of systems, exposing themselves or creating instability. Zizzo observed, allowed natural consequences to occur, and subtly guided their integration into existing structures. Through careful management, he ensured that emerging players reinforced stability rather than undermining it. Lessons were learned quietly, without direct confrontation, yet the patterns became ingrained. Time was treated as a critical tool. Premature intervention risked resistance, while delayed action risked irrelevance. Zizzo applied influence at moments when it could ripple outward efficiently, shaping events without overt force. This patient, precise timing became a hallmark of his approach, demonstrating that influence was most enduring when applied subtly, deliberately, and in alignment with natural patterns, even under heightened scrutiny from law enforcement and evolving social and economic dynamics. Zizzo maintained control. He insulated himself through delegation, maintained protective routines, and monitored systems without exposing himself. His strategy was preventative rather than reactive. Anticipation allowed him to guide outcomes before problems escalated. His influence was invisible to outsiders, yet the networks he guided operated smoothly and effectively. Understanding human nature was central to his approach. Greed, ambition, fear, and desire persisted across generations and eras. By anchoring his strategies in these constants, Zizzo remained effective. As new personalities, technologies, and challenges emerged, the city's underworld continued to function because he understood not the surface detail of transactions or territory, but the underlying human impulses that drove behavior. His guidance was subtle but transformative, shaping outcomes that aligned with long-term stability. The quiet hours offered him perspective and insight. As Chicago slowed, hidden patterns became visible. He traced alliances, predicted conflicts, and identified opportunities in ways invisible during daylight. Strategic adjustments were then made quietly, with minimal intervention. Systems were stabilized, relationships reinforced, and the city's underworld continued to operate smoothly under his unobserved guidance. His presence was calm, unremarkable to most, yet every action ensured enduring influence. Anthony Zizzo exemplified the art of quiet mastery. Power did not require spectacle, recognition, or confrontation. Instead, authority emerged through observation, patience, and precise action. Conflicts resolved, networks functioned efficiently, and outcomes aligned naturally because of his subtle guidance. Influence was enduring because it operated below the surface, shaping events in a way that appeared inevitable to those affected. Zizzo demonstrated that true control comes not from visibility or force, but from understanding, discretion, and the deliberate cultivation of patterns over time. Over decades, Zizzo endured where others faltered. Chicago's underworld changed, new players arrived, and external pressures increased, yet he remained steady. He navigated complexity with grace, blending into ordinary spaces while shaping extraordinary results. His influence was subtle, strategic, and enduring, a quiet presence ensuring the smooth functioning of systems and the preservation of stability across generations. In the stillness of the night, as Chicago slept, Anthony Zizzo existed as a silent anchor. His work was unseen yet impactful. Outcomes were guided, tensions diffused, and systems maintained balance under his invisible hand. He proved that authority, when grounded in observation, patience, and strategic subtlety, could endure far longer than the loudest, most visible claims of power. Zizzo was a constant, unbroken, and unassuming presence, a master of quiet influence whose control over events required neither recognition nor spectacle, but only understanding and patience. Anthony Zizzo had spent decades refining the art of quiet influence, and by now, it had become a natural rhythm, a way of life. Chicago's underworld was no longer just a network of individuals competing for power. It had evolved into a complex ecosystem of relationships, alliances, and opportunities, all governed by subtle interactions. Zizzo moved through it like a silent observer, orchestrating outcomes through careful attention, insight, and patient guidance. His power was not visible to most, but it was undeniable in its effects. Events unfolded with a quiet inevitability, a reflection of the careful influence he had cultivated over decades. Observation was the foundation of his approach. Every conversation, every glance, every shift in behavior carried meaning. Zizzo could detect ambition, fear, or hesitation in a manner few others could, and he used that awareness to anticipate outcomes long before they became apparent. His interventions were measured and precise, often so subtle that the people affected had no sense of external influence. They moved according to the systems he had helped shape, believing their choices were entirely their own, while in reality, Zizzo's guidance had quietly steered them. Patience was essential. Many in Chicago's underworld acted impulsively, driven by ego or the desire for immediate gains. Their overreach often exposed them to risk. Zizzo, however, waited. He allowed patterns to emerge, mistakes to reveal themselves, and opportunities to crystallize. When action was required, it was executed at exactly the right moment, never too soon, never too late. This timing was the key to his enduring influence, ensuring that outcomes aligned naturally, and that his interventions were effective without drawing attention. Relationships were maintained through consistency and reliability. Zizzo did not command loyalty through intimidation. He earned it by being dependable. People knew that when he became involved, matters were resolved efficiently, predictably, and discreetly. Trust was reinforced not through words or promises, but through repeated experience of his effectiveness. In a world where chaos often dominated, Zizzo's presence brought calm and certainty, creating an invisible web of influence that stabilized the environment. The city itself served as both stage and instrument. Zizzo understood the rhythms of neighborhoods, the flow of commerce, and the cycles of social interaction. Certain streets, businesses, and communities exhibited predictable patterns, influenced by work schedules, economic trends, and human behavior. By observing these dynamics, he could identify pressure points, anticipate tension, and determine the most effective moments for subtle intervention. His guidance preserved balance, minimized conflict, and ensured continuity across networks without ever needing to assert force. Silence was a tool he wielded masterfully. By speaking sparingly and pausing deliberately, Zizzo encouraged others to reveal information without realizing it. Ambition, fear, and intentions became apparent in these quiet gaps. His calm presence inspired confidence, yet concealed his own plans. Authority emerged naturally from his actions rather than from overt assertions of power, allowing him to guide events with minimal disruption and maximum effect. Excess and exposure were avoided in all areas of life. Fame, ostentation, or conspicuous behavior invited risk. Zizzo preferred simplicity and discretion. His personal routines mirrored his professional philosophy. Controlled, deliberate, and unremarkable to the casual observer. This allowed him to operate freely, observe more effectively, and influence without drawing attention. Visibility was a liability, subtlety was his strength. New entrants to the underworld often underestimated the complexity of the environment. Ambition frequently led to errors, misjudgments, and exposure. Zizzo observed these behaviors, allowing natural consequences to occur while subtly maintaining order. Through this quiet guidance, emerging figures learned the unspoken rules of patience, discretion, and strategic calculation. He ensured that the ecosystem continued to function efficiently, with stability preserved even as new personalities navigated the networks he had helped shape. Time was a strategic resource. Premature action risked resistance, and delayed action risked irrelevance. Zizzo applied influence precisely, using minimal effort to generate maximal effect. His interventions were almost imperceptible, yet their outcomes were powerful. This ability to move in harmony with natural patterns, rather than imposing control through force, was central to his enduring authority. Even under growing scrutiny from law enforcement, evolving societal norms, and the constant influx of new players, Zizzo adapted without compromising his principles. He insulated himself through trusted intermediaries, maintained operational discretion, and ensured that his influence remained pervasive yet undetected. His leadership was preventative rather than reactive. He anticipated challenges and resolved them quietly before they escalated into crisis. This approach preserved his safety while ensuring that systems operated efficiently. Understanding human nature was the cornerstone of his strategy. Greed, ambition, fear, and desire persisted across decades and generations. By building strategies around these constants, Zizzo remained effective despite societal shifts and changing dynamics. New players often misjudged the environment, revealing vulnerabilities that could destabilize operations. Zizzo allowed natural consequences to teach lessons while reinforcing stability, ensuring that experience rather than force dictated behavior. Nighttime provided perspective. The quiet city revealed subtle patterns that were obscured during the day. Zizzo observed the movement of people, the dynamics of neighborhoods, and the flow of social interaction. From these observations, he refined his strategies, reinforcing balance and ensuring opportunities were maximized. His presence was calm, unremarkable to outsiders, yet every action maintained equilibrium and guided outcomes effectively. Anthony Zizzo exemplified the power of subtle mastery. His influence did not rely on aggression, spectacle, or recognition. It was rooted in patience, observation, and precision. Conflicts resolved quietly, decisions aligned naturally, and networks operated efficiently under his guidance. Outcomes appeared organic, yet were often the result of decades of careful orchestration. Zizzo's power endured because it was invisible, strategic, and deeply rooted in understanding human behavior. Through decades of change, turbulence, and adaptation, Zizzo persisted. Others faltered due to impatience, exposure, or impulsive decisions. He remained a steady presence, blending seamlessly into ordinary spaces while shaping extraordinary results. His influence was subtle, precise, and enduring, ensuring the smooth functioning of systems and the preservation of stability across the networks he guided. In the still hours of the city, as Chicago moved into quiet, Anthony Zizzo existed as a silent anchor. His work was unseen but impactful, diffusing potential conflict, reinforcing networks, and maintaining equilibrium. He demonstrated that true authority is not measured by recognition, confrontation, or spectacle, but by observation, patience, and subtle, strategic influence. Zizzo was the unbroken, unassuming force whose careful guidance shaped outcomes, ensured stability, and defined the art of enduring control in a world driven by noise and visibility. Anthony Zizzo's life in Chicago's underworld had always been defined by subtlety and patience, and now, after decades of observation, influence, and quiet orchestration, he stood as a testament to the power of invisible authority. His methods were never about confrontation, force, or spectacle. They were about understanding, timing, and the careful shaping of outcomes so that they appeared natural, inevitable, and self-directed. The city moved around him, yet he navigated it effortlessly, blending into ordinary spaces, while shaping extraordinary results with a precision that few could comprehend. He had long recognized that visibility was a liability. In a world where ambition often led to reckless action, those who sought fame or recognition rarely survived. Zizzo, however, cultivated influence through discretion, reliability, and a profound understanding of human behavior. People trusted him not because he demanded it, but because his actions were consistent and his judgment dependable. If he became involved in a situation, resolution followed naturally, conflicts dissipated, and outcomes aligned in ways that maintained stability and reinforced order. This trust was the foundation of his power, quiet yet enduring. Observation had been his constant companion. Over decades, he had honed the ability to notice minute changes and alteration in tone, a hesitation in speech, a subtle shift in routine. These seemingly insignificant signals revealed intentions, motivations, and vulnerabilities, while others reacted impulsively, exposing themselves to risk. Zizzo waited, absorbing information and mapping the possible trajectories of people and events. He learned that the greatest errors came not from action itself, but from misreading behavior and misjudging timing. By mastering these subtleties, he positioned himself to act with precision when the moment demanded it. Patience was his most reliable tool. Many newcomers to the underworld rushed, eager to assert themselves or gain immediate rewards. Their impatience often led to mistakes, exposure, and vulnerability. Zizzo, in contrast, allowed circumstances to unfold naturally, learning from these outcomes while guiding his interventions with careful discretion. Action, when necessary, was deliberate, calculated, and efficient. This approach ensured that influence was lasting, decisions were effective, and the systems around him remained balanced, without unnecessary disruption. Relationships were carefully managed through reliability and discretion. Zizzo never commanded loyalty through fear or coercion. Instead, he earned it through consistent behavior and thoughtful guidance. People came to trust him because he delivered on promises, resolved conflicts quietly, and maintained stability. Authority in his hands was subtle. It emanated from the consistent outcomes he produced rather than from overt assertion of control. This quiet, dependable influence created networks that were self-sustaining and resilient, capable of withstanding both internal conflict and external pressure. Chicago itself became a map he could read and navigate with extraordinary skill. The cities, neighborhoods, businesses, and social networks operated according to pattern, influenced by labor, commerce, social interaction, and human behavior. Zizzo understood these rhythms intimately. He could predict where tension would arise, identify opportunities for intervention, and apply influence where it would yield maximum effect with minimal effort. He moved in harmony with these patterns, preserving stability while shaping outcomes without drawing attention to his presence. Silence remained one of his most potent tools. Zizzo spoke sparingly, leaving pauses that encouraged others to reveal more than they intended. Ambition, fear, or intention became apparent in these quiet gaps, and he listened carefully, interpreting them with precision. His calm presence reassured, without asserting dominance, and his authority emerged naturally from consistent, effective action. The people around him often believed they were acting independently, unaware that their choices had been subtly guided by his foresight. He avoided extravagance and unnecessary exposure in all areas of life. Fame, wealth, or public recognition attracted scrutiny and risk. Zizzo preferred simplicity, discretion, and routine. His personal life mirrored his professional philosophy, structured, unassuming, and deliberate. By minimizing visibility, he maximized freedom, observation, and strategic influence. This restraint allowed him to remain a stabilizing presence in a city where chaos and ambition frequently collided. New players in the underworld often underestimated its complexity. Ambition and recklessness led many to overreach, creating instability or exposing vulnerabilities. Zizzo observed, allowed consequences to unfold naturally, and subtly intervened to maintain balance. Through quiet guidance, emerging figures learned lessons in patience, discretion, and strategic foresight. The ecosystem continued to function efficiently because his influence reinforced structure rather than imposing it. Time remained his greatest ally. Premature action risked resistance. Delayed action risked irrelevance. Zizzo applied influence with precision, ensuring that minimal effort generated maximal effect. His interventions were nearly invisible, yet profoundly effective. By moving in alignment with natural patterns, he shaped outcomes while remaining undetected, allowing systems to operate smoothly and conflicts to resolve quietly. Even under intensified scrutiny from law enforcement and shifting social dynamics, Zizzo remained adaptable. He insulated himself through trusted intermediaries, preserved operational discretion, and guided outcomes preemptively rather than reactively. His ability to anticipate disruption and adjust strategies quietly ensured the long-term stability of the networks he influenced. This strategic foresight allowed him to maintain authority without attracting attention or risking exposure. Understanding human nature was central to his enduring influence. Fear, ambition, greed, and desire were constants across generations. Zizzo built strategies around these immutable traits, maintaining relevance and control even as the city evolved. New players often revealed flaws through impatience or overconfidence, and Zizzo used these moments to reinforce stability, guiding behavior without overt interference. He shaped outcomes by steering patterns, rather than controlling individuals directly. Night provided clarity. As Chicago's streets emptied and activity slowed, hidden rhythms became visible. Zizzo analyzed alliances, traced potential conflicts, and identified opportunities for subtle intervention. Adjustments were applied quietly, preserving balance while optimizing outcomes. His influence remained calm, unassuming, yet every decision reinforced order and maintained stability across the networks he guided. Anthony Zizzo's legacy was the power of quiet mastery. Influence did not require aggression, recognition, or spectacle. Authority emerged from observation, patience, and precise, subtle action. Conflicts resolved before escalating, networks operated efficiently, and outcomes aligned naturally under his guidance. Even decades of turbulence and change could not disrupt the systems he had shaped because his influence was invisible, strategic, and enduring. Over a lifetime, Zizzo demonstrated that true power is exercised not through visibility or force, but through disciplined observation, subtle intervention, and careful cultivation of relationships and systems. Others fell to impatience, exposure, or impulsive ambition. But he remained steady, a constant force of balance and foresight. The city moved around him, yet he navigated its complexity effortlessly, guiding extraordinary outcomes while appearing entirely ordinary. In the stillness of Chicago's nights, Anthony Zizzo existed as a silent anchor. His work was unseen yet impactful, shaping decisions, diffusing conflict, and reinforcing stability across generations. He proved that enduring authority comes not from recognition, confrontation, or spectacle, but from understanding, patience, and the careful, deliberate exercise of influence. Zizzo was a master of the quiet art of control, a stabilizing presence whose unseen hand guided events and ensured that balance, structure, and subtle power endured far beyond the limits of visibility. In the end, Anthony Zizzo's life was defined by silence, foresight, and subtlety. Chicago's underworld shifted and evolved, yet his influence persisted. His mastery was not in loud triumphs or notoriety, but in the quiet certainty that his decisions, interventions, and observations shaped outcomes long after the moment had passed. The city, in its restless energy and hidden networks, bore the mark of his unassuming control, a testament to the enduring power of patience, discretion, and invisible mastery.